So, welcome to today's podcast with Nicki Catchpole of Technology Business Research and me, Dave Smith from Inflow Analysis. Another exciting conversation ahead of us today with CEO Don Duet and President Scott Crenshaw of Concourse Labs. Welcome, Don and Scott.
Thank you very much.
Awesome. So I'm excited for today's discussion. And if you've been keeping up with the news a couple weeks ago, Concourse Labs emerged from stealth mode, announcing 15.2 million in Series A funding and a great charter to really accelerate enterprise digital transformation through automated cloud governance. And so we're going to get into that shortly, but a huge congratulations to Don, Scott, and the whole Concourse Labs team. Now, Nicki, I know this is another topic that's kind of right in your wheelhouse, and especially with your coverage of cloud. And so I'm betting you're sort of rearing to go here. So please do chime in and lead us off right now.
Yes, Dave, thank you. I am kind of chomping at the bit. And welcome, Don and Scott. It's really a pleasure to have you as our guests today. Now, I'm an analyst who covers cloud and related technologies such as automation and machine learning at TBR. So Dave's really not lying when saying it's in my wheelhouse. And I think my actual words back to him when he first mentioned this opportunity to speak with you was something along the lines of, this is pure liquid gold. How'd you find these guys? So up until now, Dave and I have interviewed a really wide range of guests, leaders in mission critical areas such as security and collaboration across really all industries. And this is the first time we've had guests focused specifically on cloud combined with security and government and committed to some really deep and meaningful advancements in this technology. So this is really why I'm excited about this. But before I get too ahead of myself, Don and Scott, would you mind providing us with some background on yourselves or Concourse Labs, as well as the recent announcement around automated governance?
Sure. Well, thank you very much, and we're excited to be here. I'm Don Duet. I am the CEO and co-founder of Concourse Labs, and we're, as mentioned, an enterprise startup that just came out of stealth a couple of weeks back, and our mission is really to help the enterprise broadly adopt and consume cloud with confidence and safety. Much of my background and what I learned in this space came from spending about 28 years at Goldman Sachs, helping lead the firm's investments in technology, including its embracement of both public and private cloud, including the ability to operate very large amounts of mission critical applications and data safely in the public cloud, which came from the learning and the process of recognizing that in order to make that happen, that we had to shift much of the way that we approached the usage and consumption of cloud from being a human-based, people-based processes for governance into ultimately a digitally led approach that could support automation and controls through software. And so that's most of my background.
And I'm Scott Crenshaw, and I'm the president. I joined Concourse last year from Rackspace, where I led the private cloud group. And then before that, we had the security team at VeriSign, and I spent almost a decade at Red Hat running the Linux business and the cloud and virtualization business. So actually, Don and I first started working together back in the Red Hat days when we were trying to make Linux actually consumable by the enterprises. And his team at Goldman was instrumental in helping us move a number of technologies from the experimental phase to production quality, enterprise ready, and ubiquitous. And during the process of these experiences, I had a lot of opportunity to help enterprises move to cloud and help give them the tools to move to cloud successfully. I also served on the board of one of the premier cloud consultancies, Cloud Technology Partners, which we sold to HPE. So we've between us seen a lot of companies move to cloud in a lot of different ways, and we've seen what works and what doesn't. And we really feel that there are some significant challenges in governance that, if solved, can make the path easier, faster, and frankly a lot safer for enterprises large and small.
How do you break down the term for our listeners who might not be as familiar, automated cloud governance? Does it wrap in security as well as automation? How is that really framed, and how is it different from the traditional methods of cloud migration?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think a lot of people think about governance, and it's a very broad statement. When you think about, for any company, the ability to begin to move from historically operating all of its application and data, often, its most important, business sensitive and mission critical parts of its infrastructure to the public cloud, and therefore, giving up control of many things that historically they would have had the ability to maintain direct control over is a very big change, and it is a fundamental shift in many things. One of them is how to think about the ability to ensure that you can operate a strong control agenda, because businesses need to be in control. They need to be able to support the ability to ensure that they're protecting information, that they're managing appropriately the usage of these services, whether they're on their own premise and their hardware that they bought, or they're in somebody else's cloud and they're renting it by the hour. So it's interesting when you think about the last 10 years and the growth of the public cloud, whether it be Amazon, Microsoft, Azure, Google, et cetera. There's been enormous adoption in smaller businesses, and when you look at the adoption in more traditional businesses, it's been quite stubbornly slow. And what we've seen is that often this becomes core to the reason why, that the ability to conduct controls and operate in the way you have historically, which largely was generally static in an on-premise world, and moving to a fully agile world of cloud, where a single developer or a single person can now have access to hundreds, if not thousands, of different services to go and create beautiful things. That not having a control paradigm that's also been designed to be agile itself and be able to be dynamic itself and be able to implement effectively your control objectives at scale becomes a very big impediment to the use of cloud. And so we see, again, stubbornly low usage of adoption of cloud in major complex institutions. And we really think we can help with that by really enabling them to move into a digital transformation on their control agenda that matches their business innovation and their application, innovation that they're driving into agile form.
And it's funny, we hear control is often a dirty word because developers associate that with slowing innovation and kind of the opposite of agile. And so one of the things Concourse does is it reconciles what seem to be these two opposing goals: one for the desire for the enterprise to understand what's going on and be able to, as Don said, exert some control over it, and the other is to be able to innovate rapidly and outpace the competition, or for some enterprises just keep up with the competition. And so by automating these processes that used to be manual, we can allow for the best of both worlds. The enterprise can understand what's going on and can ensure that the appropriate risks are being taken and avoided where necessary. And the developers can act at the speed and the scale that they need to compete in the world of cloud.
Interesting. Now,
I hear the spirit of Red Hat coming in there. Sorry to interrupt you, Dave.
Yeah.
There's another company, obviously in tandem with IBM, that I cover, and the idea of automation as well as freedom is one that's really paramount. So I don't know if that kind of relates to your background, but I hear what you're saying there.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I'm wondering too, with the whole pandemic and COVID, have any? So it appears that you sort of come to life at such a time, for such a time as this. But is there anything in your planning that you had to sort of revisit, or lessons that you've learned during this whole time of the pandemic?
Well, pandemic has been, interesting, obviously, for us as it has for, I'm sure all of your listeners. I'd say a couple things. One, what we have seen has been that with the clients that we work with and others that hopefully we will be able to work with in the future, that there's been a very rapid, movement into public cloud for these companies. I think there's an aspect of when you're kind of in wartime, you do what you need to do in wartime. And, for many of these companies, cloud was a peacetime event, and the ability to, run your business, to enable and support the types of demands that were coming onto their business, whether it be from, shelter in place and having a much more remote workplace, or frankly, even in the data center, being able to scale business applications to meet, increased volatility that all the markets created and opportunities that, we've heard from CIOs and CISOs that, many of these companies have done in those 6 weeks, 6 years worth of innovation that's happened. So there's been a rapid movement into the cloud, which is great. And I think, is creating a very interesting tailwind as people come out of that process of saying, listen, we're doing what we need to do to really drive our business, which includes, putting on ice a little bit of, am I doing everything correctly in a way that I need to, just to enable my firm that, as they start to come back and say, okay, great, well, now that I've moved to the cloud so quickly and I've kind of broken through the sound barrier, how do I make sure I'm doing it correctly and well, and how do I make sure I'm going back and operating it differently. So we've seen a very positive in that sense. Obviously, in terms of we were a stealth company during the most of the pandemic, so we're quite fortunate, I think, coming out and really going to market now as companies are starting to move where they can begin to engage with people like us and people that are coming to help them with their cloud usage. So I think it's been timely from that perspective.
Yeah. And so, are the conversations easier? Obviously, everyone had cloud on their on their planning and forecasting, but now it's become very real, right? With everything going on.
Yeah, I think again that's a lot of people ended up saying, you know what, we just need to move forward on this, and it worked, by and large. I mean, I'd say the thing that I hear the most back from people all over the world is just like, gee, the infrastructure held together, not even specifically the cloud, but certainly where many of these institutions were either starting to use cloud or had been using it in a more measured form, that they were now forced to go a bit more all in. That they've been able to accelerate that process, which is great. And I think coming out the other side, there hasn't been massive issues. In fact, I think they're appreciating the diversification that the cloud provides for them.
When it comes to the areas of the recent funding that your company has received, the Series A funding, and how you're looking to grow your business, what areas in particular are you focused on? Is it around the solutions and the product build out? Is it around the integration and those aspects that people maybe, especially around hybrid cloud, might expect it in the short term as they get more comfortable with cloud? Or is there an element of advisory services? How are you kind of breaking down your plan after this significant launch, in the short term at least?
You just kind of announced our agenda there. We were in stealth mode, which meant that we had received a fairly large seed round in 2018, $3 million seed funding that was put almost entirely into product development. So we were able, while in stealth mode, we were able to get our first customer up in production and running a Fortune 50 company, running at scale. So it was really, really strong proving ground, as well as working with several other design partners and doing proofs of concept. So now's the time to scale up the company. And obviously, in the context of COVID, we want to do so, relatively modestly until we see how when companies can start to engage in when traditional vehicles like they're ready to engage in sales and marketing and things like we're responding to our sales force and so forth. But we are going to build a sales force. That's number one. We're going to start doing marketing. That's number two. And we're going to continue our product development innovation and grow the product development teams. As part of that, we're already engaged in some partnerships. Those will expand because there are a lot of companies in the cloud ecosystem that are looking for expertise and solutions in the area of governance, and that happens to be the area we specialize in, and not many companies do. We'll be developing our very small consulting practice, not to compete with other consultants, but rather to give customers and those consultants the benefit of our expertise and best practices. And we're just going to generally scale the company out to help us expand and bring our solution to more and more enterprises around the world.
Really, it seems like an interesting convergence of being very niche and specialized while being very broadly applicable at the same time. Am I getting that right? I mean, of course, at a high level.
Well, we think this is a really big market. And in fact, I would describe the area of, helping companies to gain visibility into their cloud usage and to be able to understand the risks that are associated with that and control the risks and codify their policies and be able to opine in their risk posture at any time, be able to express that at any time. I think that's not a niche market. I think it's a very, very large market. In fact, we think we're a key enabler for broad enterprise cloud usage. So we are very focused, that's for sure. But when you think about the problem that we're solving, one way to look at it is that right now, depending on which analyst firm you follow, and depending on how they define cloud usage, enterprises are, somewhere between 5 and 30% of their applications are at cloud right now. So we're still really in the early days. So you can imagine the growth growing 10 or 20x. And so I think that means that for that to happen, governance has to be a problem that is solved for them. And so I think you're going to see that Concourse is going to be central to that solution. So, our expectation is that our approach will over time become ubiquitous. That's certainly what we're aiming for and hoping for, and that should span every enterprise, and even mid-market companies that want to govern themselves like enterprises do.
Do you guys think that the move towards automation fits in with the move to remote work, and kind of just even for people to kind of comprehend why automation is important? Has this helped propel your company's vision and value proposition, just as people are getting their arms around what they want to automate and what they don't? And even some people I've heard are threatened by the idea of automation, like it's the technology replacing people and is kind of in some ways a loss of control.
It's great questions. And I think, we look at certainly the movement to remote work as yet another example similar to the movement to cloud, where the movement to remote work means that the historical control plane of management, which would be you sit in your office and you watch what your people do, is now been broken. And so what are you going to replace that with? And so, we look at the automation aspects of the movement to cloud, whether it be for user-based service management and ensuring that people are doing the correct type of things, or your complex business applications, are they being protected and operating in the right way, is all being like necessary functions of these new architectures. And so we look at them less as reductive for people per se, because often what we find is we'll go into companies and they're struggling with the fact that they have good experts who understand what needs to be done or what the outcomes need to be, and that the ability to scale them, though, into much more of an agile team-based structure is very challenging, because it's hard to hire people that have PhDs in software development and security and compliance and keep going on and on and on. And so therefore, the ability to bring the control architecture and the control opportunity problem, if you would, into much more of a traditional type thing, approach you think of, like no different than software development, where you have, controls as code, you have identity of what your controls are, you have automated software that can go and ensure that, there may be hundreds of applications that you're running that against, that you don't need to have hundreds of people to go and confirm that, because you can move it into machine time. So we see all of this as ultimately accelerating the expertise that our companies have, and it really reduces the perceived cost burden of adopting cloud, because if you didn't have automation, then you are going to have to hire people, or you're going to have to take a lot of risk and judgment risk that everybody's going to be able to know everything about everything, which is just very hard to do. So I think at the center, the automation story is really at least we're finding with our customers, it's becoming less of a cut the cost of people that you have or impact the expertise you have. It's much more a scaling of those people's capabilities and making them almost superhuman, because now they can be applying technology to their areas of expertise. And it's really enabling the adoption of cloud at scale, because many of these companies do have more applications and data than people. And so any process that's going to have people at the center is going to be challenged in that kind of ratio. So that's how we're seeing the world.
Yeah, let's give you one really concrete example. So one customer that we're working with, they have the problem that in order to be able to move the applications that they want to move to cloud over the next year or two, they would have to find and hire up to 20 security experts who understand cloud deeply, and it's really hard to find people who understand cloud and security deeply. Mm-hmm. So their ability to move to cloud was gated not because of cost structure, but because they couldn't find the talent to hire if they wanted to. And so we introduced a paradigm shift. Instead of asking these skilled security people to spend their time manually reviewing each application release that goes to cloud, instead we let them review the policies as code, and then we can automatically apply those policies against every application release. So it's really a game changer. It makes the security experts that they have remarkably more productive, and it also frees the developers to move quickly and to innovate agilely.
Yeah, and I would think too that your message right now, it really is welcome, especially for organizations that are highly regulated, right? That have been worried about data at rest and privacy for so long. So this is a welcome message and a sort of a differentiated move from what's been done before and transform the whole legacy process thing into more of an automated framework with security top of mind and as sort of the primary focus.
Yeah. I mean, we have one company, a major multinational bank. They spent like 3 or 5 years and many millions of dollars retooling their whole development chain to, their engineers, their tools, their processes to be agile, and it worked. And so they're able to issue new releases of applications really rapidly. But when they go into the security review, they're kind of stuck in the old world. And that old world is a manual review of each release, and they just can't keep up. And in fact, their backlog is over 70 days to review a release. It just doesn't sound very agile. And so that's why, a paradigm shift's required. That's why, companies are so interested in what we're doing, because we can just let them break free of these shackles of the past and do things in what, Don is describing, which is really a more cloudy way. It's with automation, it's with code, not with hiring new people.
Interesting. And so if I could bring out sort of the crystal ball question that we usually like to do, where do we go from here now? As the tech industry and what you guys are doing, where do you see us? From 6 months down the line, a year, or 2 years down the line from here?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we see and what we're we've seen this continuing pretty before COVID, and I think we were seeing it again as an accelerated rate post-COVID is just that the world's going to get more complicated for these companies. There's going to be more platforms. People are going to be operating probably across multiple environments, whether it be their own on-premise plus at least 1 to 2, maybe even 3 different cloud providers. So that problem statement, that fundamental issue of there's more apps and data than people, yet the need to remain in control is very important to maintaining your business and ensuring the efficacy of your protection of customer information, et cetera, is just probably going to get worse. And so we think that it's going to really make it even more obvious to institutions that something has to change, and we hope that many of them will start to come to the conclusion that we did, which again we learned this the hard way through helping build this at Goldman and seeing other, I think, very high-end institutions that spent a lot of money and effort doing this, which is, you've got to move to a control-based architecture that's going to be no different than your software-based architecture. But by doing so, it really enables you to be much more digital, to be able to be much more agile, to be able to respond to the needs of your business without compromising your controls, and most importantly, to be able to run at scale in a way that you can attest all the time. What is my state of quality? Do I have places where I am at risk? Which on premise you couldn't do either. It's just you didn't have to care as much because you were protected by that big wall, which was your own corporate, firewall, and everything was done, inside the house, and only a few things were done in a place that would be outside the house. And so it was very different. But I think ultimately, again, it's going to get more complicated. It's going to require, and I think, raise more recognition that you really have to attack these problems with software and engineering. That's how the world attacked every other type of problem like this. And that the benefits are going to be huge, because your ability to move and operate and really innovate fast is going to be a competitive differentiator for many companies across industries. And this will be, we think, a core part of that value proposition.
As I'm thinking back on the last 20 minutes of our discussion, there are like some key words that keep coming time and time again, and that I think are, as we wrap up, really important to hone in on. I'm thinking, obviously, automation, because it's an automated solution, but to pivot and to be agile and to be able to respond and realize that there isn't really a set playbook anymore, and that roadmaps maybe are a thing of the past, and you can't really commit to a 3 to 5 timeline because we don't know what
absolutely
holds for us, right? And just for that shift, as you guys say, in paradigm is kind of how I see like the new way of people doing business. And if they're not plugged in and honed in on the necessity to be agile, then you're going to get left behind.
Yeah, and I think you hit it spot on. I think most people think agile in the context of the ability to build better software and better meet the changing needs of business. And I think that's exactly the same reason why having to rethink the way you're going to ensure that you're running your business safely and consuming these services safely it's going to need to follow that same pattern, because it's very difficult to plan for things you don't know. The world is changing at a velocity and veracity we've never seen before. I mean, every time Amazon or Microsoft introduces new services, they're not adding like one or two, they're adding like 100. And so, the ability to be adaptive is absolutely central to the ability to compete well in this day and age.
Yeah.
And you used the term cloudy before, but it's funny. It's an adjective I haven't heard, and it's kind of such a play on words, because with the cloudy nature of things are becoming much more clear and focused. So I'm sure people will kind of pick up on that slight irony there. And I know personally, I will be following to see what Concourse Labs does over the course of the next few months and year. I find this really fascinating, what you guys are have kind of projected forward and what you've been able to do so far. So thank you, Don and Scott, for joining us today, and for Dave for finding our fascinating guests.
Yeah, and actually, I would love to open the floor for some final thoughts, actually, from you, Don and Scott, because this has been a really fascinating conversation.
Well, thanks. Look, I think the enterprises are moving to cloud. We've seen that it's inexorable, and COVID has just made that more apparent and accelerated it. Mm-hmm. But they still have to navigate these waters where they have the controls necessary. They have to understand what their people are actually doing in cloud, and they have to ensure that they're managing their risk, and they're managing the trust that their customers and their partners put into them. And so I think we've seen enough to know that we've got to behave differently in order for that to happen. And that's what Concourse is trying to help them do.
Yeah, I would add to that. I just would say, I think if you are in the position, if you're a listener and you're in the position of responsibility for your company and where, how it's going to be thinking about what are the important things and needs from a business architecture or technical architecture perspective, I would very much say just draw that line for yourself. Think about, what it's going to feel like in 3 years if you really are successful in adopting cloud, and how much, that's probably going to mean that, the absence of having solutions that are designed to really help you manage yourself correctly and having, much more of a books and records or first class ownership of what your controls are. Are they operating successfully? Are they running in place? Are they dynamic so that they can be changed as the world changes? We think that most people who do that exercise are probably going to come to the conclusion that they're going to probably need to think differently about maybe how they've approached it so far, and that as they get into that, size and scale and risk, process, that having architecture that's going to really be central to managing this is going to be essential. But that's we've learned this again. We're kind of like coming back from the future, because Goldman, we had over 5,000 mission critical applications supporting all sorts of complex architectures that ran in both Amazon and AWS Google and Amazon's cloud, and we're doing that mostly through software. It would have been impossible to do it with people, but it was a huge benefit for the firm as it really looked to be competitive in a very digital and increasingly digital industry. But we see that really coming to all industries as they invest more in digital and obviously in cloud.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks again, and given your background, I mean, you guys, Don, Scott, you guys have been in the trenches of this stuff, and so given, you have such a differentiated solution, I do see the opportunity for you guys emerging as a real trusted advisor here, and obviously, with the impacts on things like services, and really begin to guide and advise not just companies but industries, I think, going forward. And so would love to have you guys come back in a few months' time, just sort of do a check-in and pause to see how things are going, right? And any recent developments. That'd be great.
Look forward to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.